Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Thursday morning. Lovely to see you, as always, and thank you for joining us for our Bible reading for today as we continue our adventure through the amazing book of Psalms. Today's psalm is 94, and it's in book 3 of the Psalms. There are 5 books of the Psalms, as you know, and today is in book 3. And it's a strange thing today because Psalms 93 through to 100 are a whole series of psalms all about the kind of the victory and the majesty and the rule of the kingship of God. All except today's. So anyway, there we go. But anyway, without further ado, Psalm 94 it is. Here goes. O Lord, you God of vengeance. O you God of vengeance, shine forth. Rise up, O judge of the earth. Give to the proud what they deserve. O Lord, how long shall the wicked exult? They pour out their arrogant words. All the evildoers boast. They crush your people, O Lord, and afflict your heritage. They kill the widow and the stranger. They murder the orphan, and they say, the Lord does not see. The God of Jacob does not perceive. Understand, O dullest of the people. Fools, when will you be wise? He who planted the ear, does he not hear? He who formed the eye, does he not see? He who disciplines the nations, does he not teach knowledge to humankind? Does he not chastise? The Lord knows our thoughts. They are but an empty breath. Happy are those whom you discipline, O Lord, and whom you teach out of your law, giving a respite from days of trouble, until a pit is dug for the wicked. For the Lord will not forsake his people. He will not abandon his heritage. For justice will return for the righteous, and all the upright in heart shall follow it. Who rises for me against the wicked? Who stands up for me against the evildoers? If the Lord had not been my help, my soul would soon have lived in the land of silence. And I thought, my foot is slipping. Your steadfast love, O Lord, help me up. When the cares of my heart are many, your consolations cheer my soul. Can wicked rulers be allied with you? Those who contrive mischief by statute? They band together against the life of the righteous and condemn the innocent to death. But the Lord has become my stronghold, and my God the rock of my refuge. He will repay them for their iniquity and wipe them out for their wickedness. For the Lord will wipe them out. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay. It's not a very well-known psalm, this one. We'll talk about it in a minute. There are, I think, basically it's in 4 sections. The first section is verses 1 to 7, which is basically a heartfelt prayer, what you got there. Then you've got verses 8 to 11, which is basically preaching to the people, especially to the foolish. Then you've got 12 to 15, which is kind of about a bit of good news. And then at the end, you've got 16 to 23, which is you might say it's a testimony as well. So you've basically got a prayer at the beginning, which is a heartfelt prayer to God. Then you've got a preach, which is verses 8 to 11, preaching to the people. Then you've got another prayer from 12 to 15, good news. Then at the end, you've got a preach again at the end, 16 to 23. So it's preach, it's people, it's prayer, preach, as you go through. Okay. So let's look at the first 7 verses first. I think the first thing to say is it's a really heartfelt prayer. There are clearly problems going on, and you kind of feel the heartfelt how long. I remember a lady once came to church, and she had lots of problems, and one of her family, I think it was a daughter, was really ill, and had weeks and weeks of treatment, and so on and so on and so on, and it just friends seemed to keep going to hospital and dying, and this person came into church and just said, look, how long, what's going on here? And you kind of, it was kind of very much a kind of a creed occurrence. It was a kind of cry of the heart, how long? Come on, and it was very much like that. And I think you've got to kind of, with Psalm 94, you've got to kind of feel here, feel the pain of the guy that wrote the Psalms, whoever that person is. We don't know who wrote this Psalm is, we don't know. But just feel here the kind of the cry of the heart here. And then you get the thing really about what the problem is. I mean, the problem is that there are some people who have been doing some awful things, that they've been boasting in their evil, they've been afflicting God's people, they've been murdering the orphan, they've been, and everything else, and they've been arrogant, and they've been crying out, where's God? This type of stuff, and that's the kind of thing that they've been up to, and you can kind of see, so you can kind of see why the guy that wrote the psalm is so kind of upset about it, and so you've got these people doing these awful things, and the the guy that wrote the psalm says, how long, O Lord? How long is this going to happen? Come before you. Your people are suffering. Widows are being, children are being killed, and all this type of stuff. And he cries out in his heartfelt, how long? And it kind of reminds me of the people of God in Egypt back in the book of Exodus, that they were under the most horrendous slavery under Pharaoh, and they cried to God, and God heard their pain. And I think you've got something going on like that similar here. That there's awful things going on. There's some very horrible people going on, doing some awful things, and the guy that wrote the psalm is saying, "How long, O Lord?" Now, the reason this psalm is not really well known, I think, principally, is because it talks about a God of vengeance, and it's not a kind of idea that we like to think of very much. We don't like to think of God as being vengeful, but I think vengeance here, I think, it's more of a kind of cry for justice. It's more that people will kind of get their just deserts, if you like. It's not gratuitous vengeance. I think what it's talking about here is he wants, basically, the psalmist wants justice. He wants God to sort it out, and he's asking God to deal with it. And in a sense, he's not doing it himself, but he's asking God to do something about it. And it's actually right that in our cry for justice, when things are going wrong, it's right actually that we cry to God that they'll be put right. And I think vengeance when we tend to think of vengeance, we tend to think of something gratuitous. But I think here it's really it's more a cry for justice. It's more a cry that God will come and sort it out. These people are being horrible to us, so God, come and sort them out. It's like that. So it's not gratuitous vengeance like we tend to think of it. I think it's more in terms of it's a cry for justice. It's a cry that God will come and sort it out. So in the first 7 verses, you've got this cry of the heart, because these people, other people, horrible people, have been coming in and crushing God's people and killing widows, killing orphans, and all this sort of stuff. And what he's asking is that God will come along and intervene. He's asking for divine intervention, that God will come and sort it out. And the next 4 verses, from 8 to 11, he then goes on to talk about the root of the problem. Now, why are these people behaving this way? Because they think the God of Jacob does not perceive. They think, and they think God doesn't hear. They think that God doesn't see. And so you get in the next bit that what the psalmist says then is, look, God made the world, so God does know. So it goes on to say, he who planted the ear, he the person that made ears in the first place, do you think he doesn't hear? He who made the eye, do you think he doesn't see? He who disciplines the nations, do you not think he disciplines us as well? And he said, the Lord knows our thoughts, and they are but an empty breath. So the people are behaving arrogantly because they believe that God's not looking. They think, therefore, they can get away with it. And therefore, it's not about doing what's right and what's wrong, or about godly or wrong. It's not about doing what's godly. For them, it's about what they can get away with. And because they think God isn't looking, because they think God isn't hearing, because they think God doesn't know, they think they can do what they like. And that is true. If people think that no one's looking, no one's listening, and it doesn't matter, then they will do what they like, because in a sense, why wouldn't they? But actually, what the psalmist is saying here is, there is a God. He made ears, so I'm sure he does hear. He made eyes, I'm sure he does see. He made brains, I'm sure he does understand too. Then he goes on in verses 12 to 15 to pray to God again. And he says, happy are those whom you discipline, O Lord, And actually, in our lives, sometimes we want, we pray for things and we don't always get what we want. And we want God to do certain things, and we want God to bless everything that we do, and so on and so on. And sometimes, often actually, God doesn't do things the way we expect him to. We doesn't do things the way we want him to, and we don't like it. And we have to submit somehow that God's will is done, that Heavenly Father knows what he's doing. And that, there'll be many times in my life then I've wanted something and God's wanted something different. I remember a lovely quote by the wife of the late Billy Graham, I think, who said, it's a good job the Lord hasn't given me everything I wanted, because otherwise I'd have married the wrong man several times. I quite like that. So actually, happy is the person who God disciplines. Happy is the person who God does point in the right direction, even if it's not what you always want all the time. Because actually, if God's way, therefore it's the right way. And then he goes on in the last 8 verses, between 16 and 23, to talk about actually God does help. He looks back on his life and he says, if the Lord hadn't helped me in the past, where would I be now? And with that in mind, he goes on to say at the end, he will repay the wicked for their iniquity and wipe them out for their wickedness, and so on. So God will do justice in the end. God's given me justice in the past, and I know God, because of that, I know God will give us justice again in the end. So, 4 sections of this psalm, okay? Verses 1 to 7, which is a heartfelt prayer. Verses 8 to 12, which is a preach to the dull people. 12 to 15, which is a prayer to God about his righteousness and so on. And the last 4 verses are looking back and therefore taking hope for the future, that God knows what he's doing. Reminding us in the end that this problem the man has is that some awful people are coming in and do some unspeakable things. Therefore, the cry of the heart is, how long, O Lord? And it comes across as very vengeful, but what he's really asking for is justice, for justice to be done. And he's praying to God that God will come and sort it out. Then he goes on to say, because the people are misbehaving because they think God doesn't hear, see and know, but he goes on to point about the person that made ears, eyes and brains is the same person, therefore, that can hear, see and know. And therefore God does know, and therefore we should amend our lives accordingly. Then verses 12 to 15, you've got about, happy is the person who actually God does straighten, because God knows what he's doing. And therefore, because they're in God's way, they're in the right way. And finally, at the end, the guy goes on to say, look, God's helped me in the past. If he hadn't helped me in the past, goodness only knows what. God only knows, you might say, where I'd be now. But he did help me. He does help us, and he will help people in the future. And therefore, we could put our trust in him. My friends, God bless you.